When a waitress served Snoop Dogg at her small café, she never imagined the surprise waiting for her. But when she read the note he left on the check, her emotions overcame her and tears began to fall. Before we dive into this touching story, comment below where you're watching from today. And if you love stories about unexpected kindness and hope, don't forget to subscribe. It was one of those afternoons that seemed to stretch endlessly. The cafe in Azure Lake had settled into a peaceful lull, with the faint hum of background music and the occasional clatter of cutlery breaking the silence. For Nora, however, the quiet only amplified her exhaustion. She had been on her feet since the morning rush, and the clock's sluggish ticking made every second feel like a marathon. Nora was used to the grind. Her life had become a series of relentless shifts at the cafe, each one blurring into the next. The rent was due in 2 days, and her phone bill was overdue. The tips that day had been disappointing, mostly loose change from distracted patrons glued to their screens. She sighed, wiping down the last table by the window, before glancing at her phone. 1 more hour to go. Her manager, a middle-aged woman with kind but weary eyes, gave Nora a subtle nod as she moved back behind the counter. It wasn't much, but it felt like a quiet acknowledgement of her effort. Nora tightened her ponytail, grabbed her order pad, and tried to shake off the fatigue. Then the doorbell chimed. The sound startled Nora out of her autopilot haze. She looked up, and her eyes immediately locked on the man who had just stepped inside. He was tall and lean, dressed in a flashy jacket and baggy jeans that somehow exuded effortless cool. 2 other men followed him closely, their sharp gazes scanning the room like hawks. Nora blinked, her pen frozen midair. It wasn't every day someone walked into the cafe flanked by what looked like security. This wasn't the kind of place that attracted high-profile guests. Her stomach tightened as she instinctively scanned the stranger's face. That's when recognition struck. It was Snoop Dogg. The Snoop Dogg. Nora's heart skipped a beat. She had grown up listening to his music, his iconic West Coast drawl and catchy beats soundtracking countless memories. And now here he was, casually walking into her little cafe as if it were the most natural thing in the world. For a moment, Nora froze, unsure of how to react. But years of customer service training kicked in, and she quickly composed herself. He was just another customer, no more, no less. Taking a deep breath, Nora walked over to the corner table where Snoop had settled. He glanced up as she approached, and for the first time she caught a clear look at his face. The familiar shades, the easygoing vibe, it was unmistakable. "Good afternoon," she said, mustering her best professional smile. "Can I get you something to start?" Snoop tilted his head slightly, his expression calm yet warm. "I'll just have a cappuccino. And maybe one of those croissants," he replied, his voice carrying that signature laid-back tone. Nora nodded, scribbling the order onto her pad. "Absolutely. Anything else?" He shook his head. "That'll be perfect, thank you." His words were simple, but there was something about the way he spoke, sincere, almost kind. Nora couldn't quite put her finger on it, but it left an impression. As she turned to head back to the counter, she felt a strange flutter in her chest. Was it nerves? Exhaustion? Or perhaps just the surreal nature of the moment? Whatever it was, it stayed with her as she prepared his coffee. Behind the counter, Nora focused on her tasks, the hiss of the cappuccino machine providing a welcome distraction. She glanced over at Snoop's table a couple of times, unable to resist the urge. He sat there quietly, his posture relaxed yet alert, staring out the window as if lost in thought. Unlike most customers, he wasn't glued to his phone or typing away on a laptop. It was different. Balancing the tray carefully, Nora approached his table once more. She placed the cappuccino and croissant in front of him with steady hands. "Here you go," she said, her voice calm despite the quickened rhythm of her heartbeat. Snoop looked up, a faint smile crossing his lips. "Thank you. You're welcome. Let me know if you need anything else," she replied, keeping her tone neutral, yet polite. As she walked away, Nora couldn't shake the feeling of his gaze lingering on her. Not invasive, just curious. It was as if, in that brief interaction, something unspoken had passed between them. The cafe settled into its usual rhythm once again, but for Nora, the moment lingered. She continued her duties, wiping tables and refilling sugar containers, all the while feeling the faint, invisible buzz of something extraordinary about to unfold. Nora returned to her station behind the counter, trying to push the surreal moment aside and focus on the mundane rhythm of her work. But it wasn't easy. Every so often, her eyes darted toward the corner where Snoop Dogg sat, sipping his cappuccino and occasionally picking at the croissant. There was something about the way he carried himself that intrigued her. He wasn't like the usual customers who came through the café, either rushed professionals or chatty regulars. He sat quietly, gazing out the window, his expression contemplative yet calm. For a while, the café seemed suspended in a strange stillness. A faint hum of background music and the clinking of plates and glasses became the only sounds. Even the other patrons seemed to sense that something, or someone, special had disrupted the ordinary. Nora busied herself, wiping down counters and tidying up stray napkins, but her mind kept drifting back to the man in the corner. It wasn't just his fame. There was a presence about him, a kind of understated charisma that made the room feel different. She tried to shake it off. He was just a customer, she reminded herself, no different from anyone else. But deep down, she couldn't deny the subtle tension that hung in the air. As she turned her back to refill the sugar containers, Nora overheard a soft chuckle from one of the other customers. "You think that's really him?" someone whispered, their voice barely audible. "Has to be," another voice replied. "Look at the security guys." Nora's ears burned, but she kept her focus on her task. She didn't want to feed into the quiet buzz that had begun circulating among the cafe's patrons. Instead, she steadied herself, determined to maintain her professionalism. But even as she tried to block out the whispers, she felt her pulse quicken. This wasn't something that happened every day, or ever, for that matter. Moments later, Snoop raised a hand slightly, catching her attention. Nora hesitated for half a second before making her way over, her notepad tucked under her arm. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice steady despite the nervous energy bubbling inside her. "Yeah," he said, looking up at her with a small smile. "This is perfect. Just wanted to say thanks." The simplicity of his words caught her off guard. It wasn't a request for more sugar or a refill, it was just gratitude. "You're welcome," she replied, her lips curling into a genuine smile for the first time that day. Nora returned to her station behind the counter, trying to push the surreal moment aside and focus on the mundane rhythm of her work. But it wasn't easy. Every so often, her eyes darted toward the corner where Snoop Dogg sat, sipping his cappuccino and occasionally picking at the croissant. There was something about the way he carried himself that intrigued her. He wasn't like the usual customers who came through the café, either rushed professionals or chatty regulars. He sat quietly, gazing out the window, his expression contemplative yet calm. For a while, the café seemed suspended in a strange stillness. The faint hum of background music and the clinking of plates and glasses became the only sounds. Even the other patrons seemed to sense that something, or someone special, had disrupted the ordinary. Nora busied herself, wiping down counters and tidying up stray napkins, but her mind kept drifting back to the man in the corner. It wasn't just his fame. There was a presence about him, a kind of understated charisma that made the room feel different. She tried to shake it off. He was just a customer, she reminded herself. No different from anyone else. But deep down, she couldn't deny the subtle tension that hung in the air. As she turned her back to refill the sugar containers, Nora overheard a soft chuckle from one of the other customers. "You think that's really him?" someone whispered, their voice barely audible. "Has to be," another voice replied. "Look at the security guys." Nora's ears burned, but she kept her focus on her task. She didn't want to feed into the quiet buzz that had begun circulating among the cafe's patrons. Instead, she steadied herself, determined to maintain her professionalism. But even as she tried to block out the whispers, she felt her pulse quicken. This wasn't something that happened every day, or ever for that matter. Moments later, Snoop raised a hand slightly, catching her attention. Nora hesitated for half a second before making her way over, her notepad tucked under her arm. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice steady despite the nervous energy bubbling inside her. "Yeah," he said, looking up at her with a small smile. "This is perfect. Just wanted to say thanks." The simplicity of his words caught her off guard. It wasn't a request for more sugar or a refill. It was just gratitude. "You're welcome," she replied, her lips curling into a genuine smile for the first time that day. The cafe door chimed one last time as Snoop Dogg exited, the sound echoing softly in the now quiet room. Nora watched him disappear down the street, his security team following closely behind. For a moment, she stood frozen, her tray balanced in one hand as 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind. It wasn't every day someone like Snoop Dogg walked into her life, however briefly. She had to admit, it was a story she'd probably tell her friends or family over dinner someday. But for now, she was just relieved to have gotten through the interaction without embarrassing herself. Shaking her head, Nora refocused on her task and made her way to his table. The cappuccino cup sat empty, the last remnants of foam clinging to the rim. Beside it, the croissant plate was nearly spotless, with only a few stray crumbs left behind. And then, there it was, the receipt. Bookmark, folded neatly, it sat tucked beneath the coffee cup like a hidden treasure. Nora picked it up, her fingers brushing against the paper. She had seen wealthy customers leave generous tips before, sometimes out of genuine kindness, other times as a casual display of wealth. She unfolded the receipt with a faint, guarded hope. Her breath caught in her throat. At the bottom of the receipt was a number that made her stomach drop, a 4-digit tip, the kind of money that felt more like a dream than reality. But it wasn't just the amount that made her hands tremble. Above the total, written in clean, deliberate handwriting, was a note. "Your kindness and hard work don't go unnoticed. My people have been where you are. Stay strong, brighter days are coming." The words hit her like a wave, washing over her and leaving her breathless. For a moment, all the sounds in the cafe seemed to fade away. The hum of the music, the clatter of dishes, even the soft murmurs of other customers. All she could hear was the pounding of her own heartbeat. Nora read the note again, slower this time, letting each word sink in. Her vision blurred as hot tears pooled in her eyes. She stumbled back into the chair across from where Snoop had sat, her legs suddenly too weak to hold her up. She couldn't believe it. She stared at the note, her fingers gripping the receipt as if it might vanish if she let go. It wasn't just about the money, though that alone was enough to ease some of her immediate worries. It was the words, the acknowledgement, the empathy. Someone had seen her. For months, Nora had been treading water, barely keeping her head above the surface. She had worked double shifts to cover rent, skipped meals to pay for her mom's medications, and fought to keep a smile on her face for customers who barely glanced her way. She had convinced herself that no one noticed her struggles, that her efforts were invisible. But now, here was proof that someone had noticed. And not just anyone, Snoop Dogg. Her tears came freely now, rolling down her cheeks as the weight of everything she had been carrying suddenly felt a little lighter. The note wasn't just a kind gesture, it was a lifeline. It reminded her that she wasn't alone, that brighter days might actually be possible. "Are you okay?" A familiar voice broke through her thoughts. Nora quickly wiped her tears with the back of her hand and looked up to see her manager standing over her, concern etched into her features. "Yeah," Nora said, though her voice cracked slightly. "I'm fine." Her manager raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "What happened?" Nora hesitated for a moment, then handed over the receipt with shaky fingers. "He left this," she said softly. Her manager's eyes widened as she took the receipt. The number at the bottom made her let out a low whistle. "No way," she murmured, then her gaze shifted to the handwritten note. Her expression softened as she read it. "Wow," she whispered, handing the receipt back. "That's something else." Nora nodded, carefully folding the note as though it were a piece of fragile treasure. "I don't even know why he wrote it. I didn't do anything special." Her manager looked at her for a long moment, then said, "Sometimes people just know. They see what you're going through, even when you think you're hiding it. You're here every day, working hard, always kind, even when you don't have to be." Maybe he saw that. Nora swallowed hard, her chest tightening at the unexpected kindness in her manager's words. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear that. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. Every interaction felt a little lighter, every step a little easier. She carried the folded receipt in her apron pocket, pulling it out every so often just to reassure herself that it was real. As Nora finally clocked out and made her way home, the note felt heavier than ever in her pocket. not with weight, but with meaning. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things would get better. The next morning, Nora was jolted awake by the incessant buzzing of her phone on the nightstand. Groaning, she rolled over and squinted at the screen. Her lock screen was flooded with notifications, dozens of texts, missed calls, and social media alerts. "What's going on?" she muttered, her voice groggy as she unlocked the phone. The first message she opened was from a coworker. "Girl, is this you? You're famous." Nora frowned, her stomach twisting as she scrolled to the next message. Another coworker had sent a screenshot of a news article with the headline, "Snoop Dogg leaves Waitress a touching note and generous tip. Internet reacts." Her heart raced as she clicked the link. The article recounted the events of the previous day almost word for word. A struggling waitress, an unexpected celebrity guest, and a note that seemed to resonate far beyond the walls of the café. At the top of the page was a blurry photo of the receipt, the note in Snoop Dogg's distinctive handwriting, prominently displayed for all to see. Nora's stomach dropped. Somehow, someone had taken a picture of the note and shared it online. Now, it was everywhere. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, the story had gone viral overnight. Strangers on the internet were pouring in their thoughts. This is the kind of kindness the world needs more of. Snoop Dogg is a real one for this. Wait, but who's the waitress? I hope she's okay. The more she scrolled, the more overwhelmed she felt. People were dissecting her story, her life, without knowing a single thing about her. She dropped the phone onto her bed and buried her face in her hands. "What do I do now?" she whispered to herself. The sound of her mom coughing softly from the next room pulled Nora back to reality. She couldn't afford to spiral, not with bills to pay and groceries to buy. Forcing herself to focus, she got ready for work and headed to the café. But the café felt different that day. From the moment Nora walked through the door, she felt the weight of everyone's eyes on her. Co-workers glanced her way with a mixture of pride and curiosity. A couple of regulars gave her knowing smiles as if to say, "We saw the news." Even her manager greeted her with an unusually wide grin. "You're a local hero now," her manager teased. "I don't feel like one," Nora muttered, tying her apron. "Well, you should," her manager said, giving her a reassuring pat on the shoulder. What happened yesterday was special. Not everyone gets to be part of something like that. The words were meant to comfort her, but they only made Nora feel more exposed. She hadn't asked for this attention. She wasn't trying to be part of anything special. She was just a waitress doing her job. The day passed in a haze of whispers and pointed stares. Customers asked her about that nice guy, and co-workers tried to coax more details about Snoop Dogg's visit. Nora kept her answers short, smiling politely while avoiding anything too personal. But by lunchtime, things reached a boiling point. A news crew had parked outside the café, their cameras and microphones ready. Nora groaned when she spotted them through the window, her stomach twisting with anxiety. "You're the talk of the town," one of her co-workers teased, nudging her playfully. "Lucky me," Nora muttered under her breath, ducking behind the counter in an attempt to avoid the reporter's gaze. Her phone buzzed again, another message. This time, it was from her manager. "The morning show wants you. They're asking for an interview." Nora's heart sank. The idea of going on television, of sharing her story with the world, made her skin crawl. She wasn't a public speaker. She wasn't even sure what she'd say. But as the hours passed, a quiet voice in the back of her mind began to whisper, "Wouldn't it be nice to explain? To remind people that this wasn't about money or fame, but about kindness." That evening, as she walked home, Nora mulled over the decision. The streets felt quieter than usual, almost eerie in their stillness. She clutched her bag tightly, the note from Snoop Dogg safely tucked inside. By the time she reached her apartment, her thoughts were still swirling. Her mom was in the living room, flipping through television channels. A familiar voice suddenly caught Nora's attention. "A simple note left by Snoop Dogg for a hardworking waitress is melting hearts across the country." Nora froze in the doorway. On the screen was a blurred photo of the receipt, accompanied by the headline, "A quiet act of generosity sparks national conversation." Her mom looked up, coughing softly. "That's you, isn't it?" Nora sighed and dropped her bag onto the floor. "Yeah, Mom, that's me." Her mom gestured for her to sit down beside her. "It's a good thing, you know. People need stories like this. I didn't ask for it, Nora muttered, crossing her arms. Sometimes the good things find you when you're not looking for them. Her mom replied gently, placing a hand on Nora's. What he wrote, that was special. And people are talking about it because they need to believe there's still kindness in the world. Nora swallowed hard, her chest tightening. It just feels too big for me, like I don't deserve it. Her mom shook her head. Don't say that. You work hard every day, and you're kind to people even when you don't have to be. That's who you are, Nora, and someone saw it. Someone decided to remind you that you matter. Tears welled up in Nora's eyes, but this time she didn't fight them. Her mom was right. The note wasn't just about her, it was about hope. The next morning, Nora made her decision. Picking up her phone, she called her manager. Tell the morning show I'll do it, she said quietly. Her manager's excitement was palpable. Really? Are you sure? Yes, Nora replied. But I'm not going to talk about the money. I want to talk about the note. About kindness, that's all. The television studio was buzzing with activity when Nora arrived, her palms damp with nervous sweat. Cameras shifted on their tripods, producers scurried back and forth, and bright stage lights bathed everything in a warm glow. It was overwhelming, to say the least. Nora clutched her bag tightly, the folded receipt from Snoop Dogg tucked safely inside like a talisman. Her manager had accompanied her, offering quiet words of encouragement as they waited for her turn on air. You'll do great, her manager whispered, giving her a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder. Nora smiled weakly, though her stomach felt like it was in knots. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, let alone under the glare of national television. Finally, a stagehand beckoned her forward, leading her to the plush couch on the brightly lit set. The show's host greeted her warmly, their smile radiating reassurance. Nora, thank you so much for joining us today, the host began, their tone kind but professional. You've been in the spotlight these past few days because of something very unexpected, a note and a tip left by Snoop Dogg. Can you tell us how it felt when you first read it? Nora took a deep breath, her hands gripping each other tightly in her lap. Honestly, she began, her voice soft but steady, it caught me off guard. It wasn't about the money, it was what he wrote. I've been going through a tough time, and those words meant more than I can explain. The hosts nodded, their expression one of genuine interest. They held up a printed version of the note, reading aloud, Your kindness and hard work don't go unnoticed. My people have been where you are. Stay strong, brighter days are coming. What do you think he meant by that? The host asked, leaning forward slightly. Nora glanced at the camera, suddenly aware that she wasn't just speaking to the host, but to millions of viewers watching from their homes. She chose her words carefully. I think he meant that we all go through struggles, no matter who we are or where we come from, she said. And sometimes, when you're at your lowest, even the smallest act of kindness can change everything. It reminds you that someone sees you and that you're not alone. The studio fell silent for a moment, her words hanging in the air. The host smiled, their expression warm and encouraging. That's a beautiful message, Nora, they said. Is there anything you'd like to say to Snoop if he's watching? Nora hesitated, her throat tightening with emotion. She smiled softly and said, Just thank you. Not for the money, but for seeing me. For reminding me to hold on to hope. You made more of a difference than you know. The interview wrapped up shortly after, but Nora felt a surprising sense of peace as she left the set. She had spoken her truth, and for the first time since the story had gone viral, she didn't feel overwhelmed. The impact of the interview was immediate. Social media lit up with reactions to her words. People shared their own stories of kindness, of moments when someone had helped them through a tough time. The hashtag Brighter Days started trending, a rallying cry for small acts of compassion. Back in her everyday life, Nora noticed subtle changes. The cafe was busier than ever, with customers coming in just to meet the kind waitress from the story. Some left little notes of encouragement on napkins or tipped a little extra, inspired by Snoop Dogg's gesture. But what meant the most to Nora were the conversations. People would stop her and share how the story had touched them, how it had reminded them to look for opportunities to help others. You've inspired a lot of people, her manager told her one evening after closing. Nora smiled, tucking the receipt into her wallet where it had found a permanent home. "It still feels strange," she admitted. "I'm just me." "That's the point," her manager replied. "It's not about being extraordinary, it's about being human. And you've shown people that being kind makes a difference." As the days turned into weeks, the media frenzy began to fade, and life returned to its usual rhythm. But for Nora, something had shifted. She no longer felt invisible. She carried herself a little taller, her steps a little lighter. Every time she opened her wallet and saw Snoop Dogg's note, she was reminded of that moment, of the kindness that had changed her life. It wasn't just about the money or the fame. It was about being seen, about knowing that her efforts mattered. And it was about paying that kindness forward, one small gesture at a time. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Did it inspire you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Whether it resonated deeply or not, your feedback helps us bring you more meaningful stories. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss another heartwarming tale. And if you have a story of your own, we'd be honored to hear it. Let's keep spreading kindness together.